Well, good morning, ladies, Mary Ann and Callie.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. So I apologize for getting started a little bit late.
Okay.
Give me just a minute to get some information pulled up here. And then even knowing that we've been having the issue about broadcasting onto Facebook Live or posting onto Facebook Live, I have yet to ask anyone what our workaround is on that. So I don't know that I have a way of getting onto Facebook Live. So it's just going to be those of us here on Zoom this morning. And this morning we are talking about miscellaneous documents, and I thought I would spend the morning here talking about the adjacent documents to our listing agreements and buyer agency agreements. However, I will take requests from the audience. So if either one of you have any questions about anything, let me know. Let's see, Mary Ann, I know we've been talking about things. I had just a lot of questions coming up over the weekend. Oh, yours was about wholesaling, so we're not
Yeah.
going to talk about that this morning. Did you
Okay.
decide to not work with that?
Yes, I did not work with him.
Okay, all right. Is that all Lynn said? And Kelly, forgive me for just a minute here. And I will go ahead and bring this up. There's a whole process of the real estate out there that is known as wholesaling. And basically it is one person buying a contract, or one person entering into a contract and then selling that contract out on a market. And there is nothing illegal about that. Sometimes we have some situations that it does become a little more unethical, maybe a little illegal. And so as a policy, our brokerage has the policy that we really don't encourage wholesaling. There are a couple of agents here in the office that do get to kind of dip their toes in it a little bit, but just because of the liability for you and for the for all of the people involved, and especially for you and the brokerage is what we're concerned about. And there's absolutely, who else is doing? Oh, Dominic's coming in this morning too. So it is absolutely legal for people to assign their rights and in the case of our contract, their obligations to in a contract to someone else. Doing that for a fee is where it kind of gets a little bit dicey. So Mary Ann, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed, is it okay with you if I mention this, Mary Ann? I guess I should have asked that.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So Mary Ann, I don't know how she found him, but tell me that. How did you and this person find each other?
Well, I know another guy who's interested in it, but that I just know personally. This guy randomly called me and I asked him how he got my information into some list. So I was a little hesitant anyway about working with him. Um, but I happen to know two off-market properties that I ran by him. And he and I said, I didn't tell him the addresses or anything, but I said, if you're interested, you would have to sign a buyer agency with me for those two properties
Right.
and before I release anything. And he was totally on board for it, but
Okay.
so I
Okay.
don't know.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So yes, you all will get those phone calls, those emails, those text messages. Because once your email and phone number are out there in the public realm, that means it's public. So yeah, be wary. I know that they're out there, those wholesalers are out there. You'll also get be contacted by people that say, that they live in California and they want to buy a $2 million property here in Kansas City. And I'm not saying that all of those are scams, but be very, very, very careful. So, all right, so good deal. So Mary Ann and well, I'll talk a little bit more about this on Wednesday too, when we do go over buyer agency and listing agreements. But good morning, Dominic. I hadn't uh, even spoken to you yet after you got all signed on here, but Callie and Dominic, just, at least say something occasionally, just so I know that you really are there.
Good
So,
morning. Sorry, it wasn't attached to the audio on here.
okay, all right. Good morning, Callie. Good morning. So, Mary Ann had reached out to me about, hey, can I just have a buyer agency on particular properties? Absolutely, absolutely. We do that a lot. And I would do that. I would absolutely do that. If someone that I don't know, so she chose the right circumstance for that. Someone that you don't know, or doesn't know you, you don't know if you can trust them, they're not sure if they can trust you yet. So absolutely, we can do it for a particular address, we can do it for a very short period of time, one day, right? One afternoon even, but we'd have to put the whole day on the agreement. So
I have a question on that, actually.
sure.
So wouldn't I, if I think that it's going to happen, wouldn't I put the agreement for the duration of what I think a contract would end up having to be, because otherwise we'd have to amend it, the end date?
Yes.
Okay.
That's true. Well, if someone is hesitant about signing a buyer agency agreement with you, which a lot of buyers are now, things may be changing for us here over the next couple of years, but a lot of buyers are hesitant to sign an exclusive buyer agency. And I'm probably going to talk about this on Wednesday too. We do have a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement too, that is perfectly okay for everybody to use. So. All right, but so people are hesitant to sign an exclusive buyer agency agreement. And what Mary Ann is saying is, well, wouldn't I want to have it for 3 months, 2 months or 3 months or something, so that we make sure that we're covering our closing date in case we have a closing date if we go under contract. And that is absolutely the case. If you are working with a buyer as their agent, representing them, you do want your agreement to cover the closing date and even a day or two after, because we always, don't always, but we sometimes have to extend a closing date. So yeah, and the answer to that is absolutely yes. However, someone who's hesitant to sign a buyer agency agreement with you, but they want to go see houses. See, here's the thing, because now we are coming into a whole different world. We will have to have some kind of agreement. I wouldn't, at this point in time, wouldn't go show a property to a buyer unless I knew how I was going to get paid. And so that, there's that part of it. I also want to, if I'm trying to convince someone to let me work for them as their agent, I want to let them know what information I can give them. So if I'm out with them for an afternoon, I have to have that buyer agency agreement in place before I can tell them anything other than a factual, a material fact about the property. Meaning, if I'm showing them a property and I don't have a buyer agency agreement with them, then, we walk into the property. If I see it's got a bad roof, then I'll go see what the seller's agent, what the seller's disclosure has to say about the roof. I can't say, oh, that looks like a bad roof to me. Or I can't say, oh my gosh, look at the condition of this floor. Or I can't say, the rest of the houses in the neighborhood are showing for, or selling for far less than this. I can't say those kinds of things because that is agency, right? That is giving my opinion, my expert opinion, my professional opinion, and looking out for their best interest. As if I'm showing them properties not under buyer agency, all I can give them are the facts as they are presented in the documents. I can tell them what MLS says, I can tell them what the seller's disclosure, and I can share that information with them, but I can't give them my professional advice and counsel. So there's that. So if they're hesitant to sign, still answering Mary Ann's question. I know, sometimes Linda has to come around through the back door on these things, but so if they're really hesitant to sign and I put something in front of them that lasts for 2 months, that may kind of, put a kibosh on that. So I want to show them what I can do for them as their agent for one day. And then if they do decide to go under contract before I write that contract, I would say, well, now we have to extend that because I'm going to be your agent through this whole process. So to answer your question, yes, you do have to do an amendment or a change form in the case of a buyer agency agreement. But that may be the best way to get through that situation. Absolutely, it is absolutely easiest, even if we are only showing them 1 or 2 properties, it is absolutely easiest to put those addresses on the buyer agency agreement and put that 2-month or 3-month date on there, but some people may be hesitant about that. Okay,
Thank you.
really long answer for such a simple question, but I'm famous for that, right? My classes do now, Callie, don't they? That, hey, all you have to do is ask Linda a question and she'll go off on 15 tangents. And we don't have to listen to that dull, boring finance stuff. So, okay. So what, okay, and so, yeah, now to finish off that whole thing, right? So Marianne and so she had put into place a buyer agency agreement on 2 specific properties. And then she texted me, this was all text between Marianne and myself, and she texted me that the buyer wanted to, on their name, on that agency agreement, what had their name and then or assigns. That's our red flag right there. There are some very legitimate times for that to be in place. And I think that's what I tried to tell her in the text. If it's one LLC, if it's someone that has 2 or 3 LLCs and they're buying investment properties, and they have one LLC here and they're actually having to at some point do a 1031 exchange on that. Oh, all that stuff that, remember, that you learned back in your pre-license class. And that's a real tricky situation. Or there's a possibility of them just selling from one LLC to another LLC in the interim. There are some, before it closes, there are absolutely some legitimate, valid reasons for someone to want to have their name and or assigns on there. But it is a red flag. And so that's what I told Marianne. You might want to ask him what is, why he wants to do it that way. And so it did turn out that it was wholesale, because I think in the text I kind of pre-warned her for that. And as a brokerage, we prefer not to get involved in wholesales. And so she asked him and he was upfront with his answer. And so she decided not to work with him. It is always our prerogative, whether we want to work with someone or not. Don't ever let anybody tell you that, you have to work with someone. You don't. And then, so she asked me then about that. And I said, oh, well, that's really a question for Lynn, because Lynn is the decision maker, right? I can help answer questions, but Lynn and David are the decision makers. So I said that was a question for Lynn. So Marianne reached out to Lynn and Lynn said, yeah, we prefer not to do that. So good choice. I mean, all of those, Marianne made excellent decisions all the way through. Reaching out if you are in a situation that you are not familiar with, even once you are finished with launch, please, please, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me or Kristen or your coach, or certainly Lynn or David. As I say an awful lot, it is so much easier for us to help keep you out of trouble than it is to get you out of trouble once you've done something that maybe shouldn't have been done. So, okay.
I have another question, actually.
Okay.
Okay, so I went to go show a buyer a house and they drove by it and ended up not even wanting to go in and just canceled. And at that same time, there happened to be a neighbor 2 doors down that was renting a house and they wanted to see it. She was like, "Oh, my boyfriend's going to see it tomorrow, but I'm working, so like, could you show it to us?" And at the time, I mean, I was like, "I can, but I want to see a picture of your ID." So they gave me their ID and I just like sent it to my husband, just in case, because I was like, "I've never met you guys." They were like my age. And I saw them walk out of that house. So like I knew exactly where they lived. But just in the future, in this new world, would I have to have a buyer agency sign then? Like have them sign something right then before I showed them it?
I would certainly try, Callie.
Yeah.
The risk is that we don't get paid. You know, that's really
Yeah.
what it boils down to. And you know, if we don't have something, in agreement, as an agreement, through July here through August, I guess is really when our drop dead date is in our MLS. And that's a great question, Callie, because we have all been put in that position at some point. It will happen to everyone. So so moving forward, because in my head, I'm trying to act as if we've already, now we're working under the new rules, under the new world. And so I would say, yes, I would ask them. But on the other hand, you know, there is always in a situation like that, you didn't know them, but you knew where they were, and it made sense for them to want to see that property. So I might take a very, and it's a chance, but I might take a very slight chance. Again, I just have to be very careful what I say. But I might take the chance on showing them that property and trying to build that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a situation like that, that's really no different than someone walking into an open house, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, someone walking into an open house, you don't know anything about them either. But
Yeah.
that was so smart of you to take a photo of their ID and send it to someone. That was great.
Okay.
Did I answer your
I was
question?
like, I'm not gonna not show him this house.
Right,
But
right.
I know, but I was also like, I've never met you before. And
Yeah.
I also made sure because they said that they were with an agent, and I was like, like, have you signed anything? And I just kind of straight up asked them, and they were like, no, this is our very first house that we're ever even gonna look at. Like, they're not really ready. I'm still talking with them now.
Oh,
But they for sure didn't have anything signed, and they weren't like, I don't even know how they found this other agent. But they had never met with them or anything. So
okay, all right. All perfect things, all perfect things. Yeah, I feel the exact same way. I am not going to not show someone a house. I'm just going to protect myself as much as
yeah.
possible. And in that situation, I probably would have done exactly what you did. Yeah, let's just,
Okay.
yeah. But so you didn't ask them to sign anything at that point?
No, I didn't.
No, that's okay. That's all right. Sometimes building that relationship is what's important.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to book like a coffee meeting or something, and we've kind
Uh-huh.
of been talking back and forth. So hopefully it will come, but
Yeah, yeah, good. You know, business comes from surprising places.
yeah.
Yeah, but oh, that happens an awful lot. Showing a property, and I mean, I can't tell you how many times that's happened. And you know, maybe your people don't want to see it, or maybe you've already shown it and you're on your, you know, after locking up and you're on your way back out and someone's walking by and it's a neighbor, you know, oh,
Mhm.
hey, you know, I've never been inside that house, you know, or can we see it? So yeah, but our world's changing just a little bit now, and it's all about protecting yourself. So
Mhm.
both physically and financially. So,
Yeah.
all right, cool. Great question.
I just think it's going to be so hard in the future where I get like, I would love to get something signed right then and there, and it would be most beneficial to me. But I think about the buyers, and in that instance, they're going to be like, I don't want to sign something with you.
Right.
I just met you. So it's just hard navigating how to do that, I guess.
That's exactly right. And in a situation like that, when it, you know, is so spur of the moment and it is just one house, it's going to take you longer to do the paperwork,
Hmm.
you know, than it would to show the property.
Hmm.
But again, just be very careful. If you don't have anything signed, make sure you are not giving any advice and counsel.
Okay.
So that's my warning to everyone. Because that's gonna, you know, I think David mentioned this in business meeting a week or two ago. It's really not going to change how we do open houses. You know, because we should have been doing that all along anyway. If it is our listing, absolutely, we are protective of our seller's information, the confidential information. Even if it's not our listing, if you are not under buyer agency, it's always been that way. Here's the thing, folks, and I think David's mentioned this, and certainly Lynn and I talked about this too, that the new rules really don't change anything. You know, they're going to change our paperwork, but it doesn't change how we should have been doing business all along. You know, and the good agents have been doing it that way. So it's just, you know, now we're just protecting ourselves financially. That's the one thing that's changed.
Hmm.
Okay, good questions. Anybody else? or anything? All right, if not, I mean, but feel free to interrupt me, this is, when we go over the contracts, like next week, that's a little bit different. I do like to get through them, but again, always questions. But the miscellaneous documents, this is, to me, this is kind of free time. So, all right, I'm gonna share screen because what I've pulled up here, if I can find the right thing, there we go. Because what we're going to talk about, what I decided I wanted to talk about today were the adjacent forms, the forms that go along with our buyer agency agreements and listing agreements. Most of those we're going to find in the, or I shouldn't say most, but a lot of those we're going to find in our KWKC Metro forms template in .loop. So that's why I pulled this up here. And I'm hoping that this is going to follow me. So I pulled up this template folder. And so we're going to go through these a little bit, whether you need them or not need them, is what is this first part of it. And then we will talk about the individual, but not that you don't need it, but if you need it, when you need it. And so then we'll talk about the individual forms, come back and do it that way. So our KWKC Metro affiliated business disclosure. Yes. This goes with all buyer agency agreements and all listing agreements. This has been updated in the last couple of months because of the new business relationships that we have with our insurance company and our lender in-house. So that goes with every agency agreement that you have. It really should go even if you don't have an agency agreement, and we're getting away from that, but even if you don't have an agency agreement, this should be signed by all customers as well. The Kansas brokerage relationship disclosure, that absolutely goes, if you know that you are taking a listing in Kansas, this is part of that folder for you, that loop for you. Each state has their own version of this. So if you are taking a listing, you would use the appropriate brokerage disclosure form. If it's a Kansas listing, Kansas form. If it's a Missouri listing, Missouri form. I encourage you in a buyer's loop, I encourage you to put both of them in there. Because I've said it before, and you'll hear this, and now that all of you've kind of been in the business for a while, buyers are liars, is kind of the phrase, but that's not necessarily true. It's just most of the time buyers don't really know what they want. And so they may tell you that they're looking for a ranch style house in Belton, and they'll end up in a split level house in Lenexa. And then they write the contract on that one and close on that Lenexa property. If starting to work with them on your buyer agency agreement, you'd said that you were looking in Belton and you had only provided the Missouri brokerage disclosure form, you're going to be in trouble because they're under contract and have purchased a property in Kansas, and those disclosures were never made. So I think it's just easier to put both of them in the loop. Neither state wants us to require signatures on them. Kansas, we can, but neither state requires that. It is just a requirement that they have been given that form. I think that it's a requirement. I mean, this is, Linda's opinion of this, and I think Lynn backs me up on this, is that you should also have that discussion. And it is becoming more and more important now, as we are getting into this new world with buyers, that they do understand how you will work for them, the services that you will provide for them, and that the other side is going to be represented. They might feel it's in their best interest to be represented as well. So not only present the forms, but have the conversation. No one expects you to read the form to them. Currently, our listing agreement, a buyer agency agreement, and contract all say that it's kind of required reading for our buyers and sellers. And so we kind of leave it up to them, but nobody reads our contract. The buyers and sellers don't read our contract. They certainly don't read those agency agreements. So I think it's a really good idea for you to have your, it's not going to take you more than a minute to get through everything that's on those forms. The forms have a lot of legalese, very confusing information. It certainly doesn't make things as clear as the two states want. That was the whole purpose of it. So you have your own little 30 to 60 second little conversation with the buyers and sellers about representation. So that's the Kansas and Missouri agency disclosure brochures and disclosures. And so in a buyer's loop, I think you should have both of them in there. The KWKC Metro Exclusive Buyer Agency Agreement, that's what is our agreement between ourselves and a buyer that wants our representation. So we will talk about that on Wednesday. This Wednesday is listing agreement and buyer agency agreement. So we'll talk about that. KWKC Metro Exclusive Right to Sell, you need this in the loop signed by all parties if you are taking a listing. On the buyer agency agreement and listing agreement, right to sell agreement, it doesn't matter what state they're in, they're all the same forms. It's just those two disclosures that are dependent upon which state they're in. The KWKC Metro Inspection Advisory for this is, I think, and you know, when I say that it's required, it could be either just Linda's opinion or it could be compliance. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. If I say it's required, you should probably just go ahead and put it in there. I think this should be required in all buyer agency or buyer loops. We'll talk about this, but it is a buyer form, not a listing form, but it's a buyer form that talks about what kinds of inspections they can get and the importance of getting those inspections. We'll talk about that probably in the second hour here. Oh, I don't know. It's only 9:30. Gosh. All right. So take KWKC Metro Investment Property Disclosure. This would be for listing. If you are listing a property that has been used as an investment property. I will go ahead and just open this one up here for just a second because we will talk about that. There is also a KCRAR form that's very similar to this and the interactive forms in the KCRAR templates folder. This one was updated for our brokerage late last year. That this covers everything. This is kind of an either or. I just kind of like to use this one just because it does still have our logo at the top, you know, kind of reinforcing all of that. They both ask for the same information. They both make the same claims and add the same things to our contract. And the reason that I decided that I did want to open this up because I am going to, you know, I will go over this one just real briefly here. So we have our sellers and buyers identified and the property address identified as we do at the header in all of our documents. Our rent schedule. So monthly rent if vacant, please enter most recent rent amount. So if our investor is selling a property that has been in, or our seller is selling in a property that has been an investment property, then all of this information about that one property. That's the big difference between this form and the KCRAR form. This one is just a single property form. KCRAR has these blocks for, I think maybe up to 5 or 6, I can't remember exactly, but multi, because a lot of investors do purchase as packages and sell as packages. This is for one of those single property instances. Have any tenants given notice to quit? So you would, I think this is really just answering the question, or do you know anything about the future of a current signed lease? The expense information, if you're working with investors, they know this stuff, and this is one of those documents that we put on MLS because anyone thinking about purchasing the property as an investment property wants this information. So this is valuable information in here. Additional information, this is just kind of one of those, you know, umbrella things. Any other leases or contracts for services in the building, operating income statement. See, it would be an important thing for an investor to provide, our seller to provide to a future investor. And then additional comments. But I like the paragraphs here on the last page. Rent shall be prorated as of the day of closing. All prorated rent and security deposits shall transfer to buyer at closing. That's a very important sentence to be in there. That is an important sentence to be in a contract. So if this form is not available, if you're working with an investor buyer and this form is not available from the current owner, from the seller of that property, make sure that you include that sentence in a contract. So again, just, you know, As a reminder to everyone that's listening to this, whatever source you're listening to it, if you are ever working with an investor, make sure you're talking to your coach, to me, to Kristen, or to Lynn about because there are special things. Our contract is written for owner occupancy, basically. So there are some things that need to be added in if you're working with investors. After all buyer contingencies are satisfied, seller agrees to provide buyer a copy of the lease. Another very important thing there. Our buyer, the buyer, is entitled to that information. They can certainly see what they're told up at the top of the page what the dates are and that kind of thing. But they're really only entitled to that once if there's a financing contingency on there, an inspection contingency. We don't want to be giving out that particular tenant's information to a potential buyer unless we're pretty sure that buyer is going to be purchasing that property. That's just kind of bad news. If anybody can, every sentence in any of our documents are in there because someone had a problem at some point in the past. This one, I'm sure, was because if we just give just hand out those leases with the current tenant's name and information on them, it's the potential for poaching those tenants, right? So I'm sure that's kind of what happened and why the sentence is in there. But again, another very important sentence: if this form is not available, that needs to be in our contract. Seller acknowledges that sellers provided the above information and that such information is accurate, true, and complete to the best of seller's knowledge. Seller authorizes the listing broker to disclose the information contained herein to other brokers and buyers. So as I said, if we get this form, which I encourage you to try to get this form signed by your seller, certainly try to get it. If it's not available, ask the listing agent, well, what paperwork is available? Do you have an income statement? And it doesn't necessarily, that's the other thing too, this doesn't necessarily have to be this form. A lot of, savvy in today's world, investor owners have their own system of keeping track of this. And it might be easier for us to just get a copy of that Excel spreadsheet. So that's fine too, as long as it's this basic information. And then our final legal disclosure at the bottom, that's at the bottom of all of our documents. And so this would become part of the contract in that situation. And so it then would be listed in paragraph number 2 of our contract. Okay. Come on, get back over here. All right, the KWKC Metro landfill disclosure. It's certainly not required, but if you are taking a listing on a property that is within, I would say, 5 miles of a landfill, certainly within 1 to 2 miles. But, is everyone kind of familiar with what's going on over in Jackson County, over in the kind of the Lee Summit? It's kind of between Jackson County and Cass County, but it is still definitely on the Jackson County side, about a proposed landfill. So that's certainly going to affect properties over there, properties currently, all homeowners are going to be affected. And certainly in the future, that's going to affect the saleability of certain properties too. So if you know that you are listing a property that would be affected by any landfill, there's one over in Shawnee, landfills are in surprising places. And they're put out where at one time it was pretty remote, but our city has grown. So you will find landfills in surprising places. There's one up in Kansas City North. And so it just kind of be mindful. That's one of those things that I think every agent should be checking into, because this is one of those things that, is this something that you know or should have known? Missouri has a should have known requirement in there, and I always then apply that to Kansas as well. So does everyone know how important it is to me? I guess it's the way I should put that. You should double check on all zoning of a property every time you list it. We don't necessarily get copies of deeds right away, but I always ask for copies of deeds at closings, because the title company will let you know if there's an easement, you know, or something like that. But I think, number one, I just think it's important, you know, the deed is the one thing that's what we get up and work for every day, is transferring a deed from one person to, or one party to another party. So you know, it's the most important part of what we do every day, but it's the most overlooked thing, what we do every day too. So I think you should have a few deeds in your, you know, up in your file somewhere, and read the deeds and see how they're worded. And there's a wide variety of deeds too. But so you know, I always check on zoning, and if there's anything that shows up, if it's a property that I've dealt with before that shows up in the paperwork I have from it. If I worked with the buyer 3 years ago when they bought the property, I go back and look at the title commitment to see if there's anything funky that shows up there, you know, all that kind of thing. Look around, see where the schools are. See if there's a landfill, see how close it is to commercial properties. All of those things, when you're taking a listing, are things that you need to be aware of, and make sure that you are preparing your seller for how those things might affect the sale of their property, your marketing of that property. Certainly, if you're working with buyers, I encourage you to do all of those same things, and encourage the buyer to do all of those same things too. Anything that you see, you know, kind of point out to, you know, you're a couple of blocks away from that shopping center, but you might want to drive by the property at night and see how the lights affect your backyard, you know, your potential backyard, those kinds of things. So that landfill thing, one of those things, just be mindful of that. Certainly not necessary on every listing, but it might be on certain ones. KC Metro.
Oh, can I ask a question? So
Sure.
on landfills, is there a way for us to know? Is there like a place that we could go look? Like, how would we know if there's a landfill?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, I kind of made the assumption there because I pretty much know where they are because I've been doing it for 40 years. But you that have only been in it for a few months may not know that. I think the parcel map will show it. I think the parcel map on MLS will, and might not call it a landfill, but it would tell you that it's owned by Deffenbaugh, what's the other, waste management company. That's a great question. I'll look at that. I'll look at that over break.
Okay. And then Dominic did put in the chat what's happening in Lee's Summit.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for watching the chat for me there too. Dominic, there is a proposed landfill out. It's kind of between Belton and Lee Summit. They're along the 150 corridor, not right on 150, but that's the area that it's affecting there. So it's a proposed landfill. It's already been voted in, but you know, there's still a lot of legal hoops to be jumping through there. So any properties out there are certainly going to be affected, if not by the landfill itself, by the stigma of a landfill. And since this one has been in the news and talked about out there, you know, anybody that lives out in that area is fully aware of it. Yes, those of us living over here in Johnson and Miami County, we're kind of insulated from that. If there were one being proposed out, you know, close to Stillwell, we would certainly be, you know, more attuned to that one as well. So anyone that's out there in that area or is familiar with that area is going to know all about that. So thanks for keeping an eye on the chats for me. All right, I usually check those at break, but sometimes the question is more imminent than that. The KWKC Metro private office listing modification. So does everyone here understand what a POE is, private office exclusive? If not, Linda, that's why I'm here, to explain these to you. So we take a listing agreement, and our listing agreement says that we're going to be putting this information on MLS, and we're going to be marketing this information in a variety of ways, meaning it's going to go out onto social media. We're going to be sending the information to other agents, to other potential buyers, to past clients. We're going to be sending this information to all of the other agents in the Kansas City metro area. There are a few instances in which the seller may not want that information out there. If you're working with a local celebrity you know, an athlete or, you know, possibly, you know, so, you know, government official or something like that. They may not want every person in the public privy to their property. Completely understandable. A private office exclusive was intended for those kinds of situations where we only market it to it. Because, you know, here's the thing, if everybody remembers again from your pre-license class, your listing agreement is between your seller and your broker, not you. You're a designated agent representing your broker there. So that agreement is between the seller and the broker. So what the seller then is saying to the broker, I want you to sell my property, but I don't want all of that public marketing going on. So we can market it within our brokerage and we can sell it within our brokerage. We can only say, you know, here we go with some of these weird rules now too, right? We can sell it to a buyer within our brokerage. I mean, and if I take a private office exclusive and Dominic has a buyer that wants and that wants to see it, or Dominic thinks that they should see it, Dominic can only show that if Dominic has a signed buyer agency agreement on that property. We cannot market it to anyone outside of our brokerage. So very specific rules on that. Be very careful. We are, you know, it's been used in other ways here in the brokerage. And I think, you know, some people kind of encourage you that let's go ahead and take, if you're taking it early, you're planning on going on MLS at a future time, or taking it early now, this is the only way that we can go do, you know, broker price opinion on it, you know, that kind of thing. Try to sell it here, but fully intending to at some point in the future put it on MLS. There's nothing unethical about that. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that that's not what the intended use for it. So we certainly use it in other situations as well, but the intended use is a seller that doesn't want their information out there in the public domain. And then the KWQC Metro Referral Agreement. If you are lucky enough to be working with someone, to know someone here that is moving to another part of the country, I think that, you know, there are agents that make really good money just by doing referrals. And so this is certainly something I think that you should make sure that you have in your arsenal of tools for your personal income. So let's say that Kelly knows someone here that's moving to St. Louis. And so Kelly is licensed in the state of Missouri. So can she go over and sell a property? Can she, go over and spend her weekends doing that? Well, legally, yes, if they are buying on the Missouri side. But my suggestion to you is, I don't think that's a good thing to do. You don't know how they do things in St. Louis. And Kelly, I'm not picking on you, you know that. It's, because there comes a point where, I mean, I would say the same thing about Warrensburg. Right. And that's, can I sell a property to someone in Warrensburg? Sure. Right. Legally, I can. Should I sell a property to someone in Warrensburg? Should I take a listing in Warrensburg? That's a whole different thing. I don't know how they do things there. And you also have to watch out, and I'm not going to, well, yeah, I can say this about St. Louis as well. The agents in Warrensburg aren't going to be real thrilled about working with you. Right. So even if you take that listing there, you may not get showings just because you're an outsider. Certainly, and I can say the same thing about St. Louis too. They may think, well, why would I want to work with somebody that, that's based in Kansas City? So what should Callie do in that situation? What's the best way to service her? And at that point, it's probably not a client, it's a customer, but to service the public is to make a referral. And there's just like there's no set commission rate, there's certainly no set referral rate. I will say that it's typically in the 20 to 30% range, typically kind of settles in at the 25% referral fee. And that is, you know what that is, if we were receiving a referral and paying out a referral here, that means that we take the brokerage commission and the referring agent gets 25% of that. It's not 25% of yours, it's 25% of what the brokerage receives. So, and I think that's the way most brokerages around the country handle it. So Callie then makes a referral to, finds a good, and here's what I think is important, finds a good agent in St. Louis. I think you can spend an hour, I think, making phone calls. One of the first things that I would do is put it in our closed agent Facebook page out here. Hey, does anybody have a great referral or a great agent that they have worked with in St. Louis? Because chances are someone is, and that's anywhere across the country. Chances are someone's going to know someone. And so you make it 2 or 3 names. I would still go ahead and make the phone calls to those agents. There's a lot you can tell from a 5-minute phone call with an agent. How knowledgeable they are, what kind of personality they are, and not that we're matchmakers necessarily, but if it's someone that you're not getting very much information from, and that you're working with that the person that you're sending out there will ask all kinds of questions, that might not be a real good match. You might still give them the name, let them make that phone call too, but because I think that is a very powerful thing for you to be able to say. So for Kelly to say to her friend that's here, that's moving, say, well, I had a conversation with all 3 of these. I really liked this first name up here, but go ahead and call the other 2 too and see what you think. I think that's really very powerful. And as I said, a lot of agents do make a pretty good living just doing referrals. So, all right. So we got through that list, and we're going to go ahead and take our break. It's 9:53. We're going to take a 10-minute break here. I am going to look up on MLS and see now that Marianne has asked me that. Very good question. So anyway, I will see you all in 10 minutes, and we will then actually look at some of the details of some of these other forms. Okay.
Mm.
Okay. We're back. Hi, Dominic. So yeah, I saw your two chats and that you were having issues with your mic. And so, yeah, you know, technology stuff, and especially on Mondays for some reason. That always happens. So I'll get back to sharing screen again. All right, so to answer then the question, you know, I want to make sure that that follows me. Hold on.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. There you are. Right. All right. Thank you. And so then to answer Mary Ann's question, which was an excellent question, and I apologize for kind of making an assumption there. It's not easy to find them. I did go onto the parcel map, but they Deffenbaugh in Johnson County is well marked, owned by Deffenbaugh. So if you happen to know that they are with the kind of in charge of waste disposal in Johnson County, and they do Missouri as well, but then you would know that. But otherwise, you're better served by going to the county or city websites. And so I guess that's something I need to kind of I'll be, complete transparency in Linda's world. A couple of them I found out about after the fact. It kind of became a problem. Being by a landfill, I mean, if someone's like, on the main road towards one, they're gonna have the truck traffic and all that kind of stuff. I'm actually getting back to dot loop over here and then coming back. So, and that kind of becomes obvious. What's more important about being around a landfill in our world, is the aroma, shall we say? And everyone, I think, is pretty familiar with the one, agents that have been in the business for a while, pretty familiar with the one that's over in Johnson County, because it's been there for years and years and years and years. Most of them have. And it's huge. It's a huge facility. It's probably the largest one in the metro area. And there are some pretty high dollar properties that are affected by the smell of the landfill over there. And a lot of times you will know that you're close to one when you're showing a property and you're outside and you can smell it. And so that's kind of been, that's how I have found out about a couple of them, early in my career. And so that's kind of also when I decided at some point that that's something for us to look into. So so I'm going to say that probably as I learned about them, it was kind of, a one at a time kind of thing, but you can't, so there's really no easy way to find it, even on the parcel map. But if you're looking at a parcel of land and you kind of expand around it, you can see, because as I did that on the Jackson County side, it just says that it's owned by Jackson County. And that doesn't tell us anything. So that's just something for you to, put that on your list of things that you need to know. If you are listing a property in Jackson County, I would say, go on and look and find out everything that you can about that property. You're going to, and especially in Missouri, because Missouri is known, or should have known, as a listing agent, and then also as a buyer's agent on that. I think that's just kind of an important thing for us to be aware of. And then to kind of tie that in with the question that Dominic answered, if you go on and Google, because that's what I just did, if you go on and Google Jackson County landfill, you will find all kinds of information about the one that's being proposed over in Jackson County. So, and it is Jackson County, even though it kind of affects the very northern part of Cass County as well. They're kind of getting involved in it. There's still all kinds of stuff going on about it. So there's all kinds of things that you can learn about that. Okay, I'm going to share screen again. We're going to get back to I guess I should ask if there are any other questions about that. No one. Okay. All right. So I talked about the ones that are here. I'm going to go back and we're going to talk about the inspection advisory, because I think that's an important one for all of us to be familiar with, especially as we are still in the world of using the in its present condition addendum on a lot of offers. And there are a lot of sellers out there that want that included in the listing agreement. So I think this is an important one. And as I said, in Linda's world, this would be a requirement. I think this should go into every buyer's loop. And this is, again, just your evidence. I mentioned this at Wednesday Night Warriors the other night, and I'm hesitant to mention it again because there are 4 requirements for us to have our E&O insurance, errors and omissions insurance, cover us. And at any given moment, I can only remember 3 of them. So let's see if I can actually remember all 4. We have to use standardized forms, which we all do, right? We're using the KCRAR forms. We have to have the conversation with both buyers and sellers about home warranties. That's how it came up in Wednesday Night Warriors the other night. And that's why on our contract, we now have that checkbox, which I think was a fabulous thing that they finally did on the forms committee a couple of years ago, to show that we've had that conversation. That's our evidence that we've had the conversation. Again, do we really have that conversation? Make sure you talk with buyers and sellers about what a home warranty is, the benefits of them, right? I know they're expensive. They've gotten very expensive over the last few years. But also when you think about how expensive it is to have someone come out and even take a look at an appliance, much less work on an appliance. So, and we also have to have had the conversation with buyers about inspections. And so once again, this is your evidence that you've at least addressed the situation. So I think this should be in every buyer's loop, every buyer's folder that you have, file that you have. But also just sending this form, it'd be on any document, you should be having conversations about what the document says. And that includes this one. The importance of the inspection is the last thing that's addressed on here, but it starts out with, although it does say the buyer should have, they have the right to, and they should perform their inspections. And then there's a list here of the more common inspections that buyers have. The overall physical inspection, what we call the whole house inspection, the infestation and wood destroying insect inspection, which most inspectors will either do themselves if they're licensed to do those inspections, or have a relationship with a licensed pest inspector. But it has to be a licensed pest inspector that's doing it to make any claim, towards the seller doing the treatment, because I hope you all realize that our contract says that the seller will treat for wood destroying insects if evidence of them have been found. Roof inspection, most whole house inspectors will do a cursory roof inspection. And if they see problems, they will probably suggest that you get a contractor out there, a specialized roof inspection contractor out there. And so again, those are very, very, very common. Structural foundation engineering report. This I wouldn't say is necessary on all properties, but again, most whole house inspectors will indicate on the report, and then also in their verbal wrap-up, if they have seen something that they question, whether it's cracks or some evidence of settling. A lot of inspectors, so one of the things that most inspectors do is go around the house, on the exterior of the house, and measure the distance between the siding and the foundation. And if there's a discrepancy in any part of the house there, they may suggest that. If a buyer sees cracks, it is not up to us to tell them to make any kind of determination on whether those are serious cracks or not. If the buyer has questions about them, it's up to us to say, well, we can have a structural inspector come out, right? Every one of these obviously is going to cost. A lot of times you can get a roof inspection done that, the contractor will just come out and take a look and give an estimate with no additional charge for that. But obviously a structural engineer is going to charge for giving an engineer's report with their stamp on it. So that's usually a couple of $100 there. The radon, microbials, and other environmental pollutants inspection. This is all kind of lumped into one. There are several inspections though that are all kind of lumped into one. Radon inspection, I think, is pretty common. I hope everyone here understands the importance of knowing whether there's radon in the property or not. And even if you sold the house next door last month and it didn't have a high radon reading, that doesn't mean that this house next door to it won't have a high radon reading. That's a individual house by house thing. That's not an area thing. It's not a Kansas City thing. It is a house by house thing. Again, $100 usually for the 48-hour electronic monitor to be picked up, and then that report provided. And I hope that everyone knows too that there is no requirement to mitigate radon. EPA has, the Environmental Protection Agency, federal agency, has given the recommendation that if an average reading over that 48-hour period is more than 4.0 PCIs, that they recommend mitigation of radon. There is no requirement for it. There's no requirement for having a test. It's just how is the person going to use the property? They always take the reading on the lowest floor of the living space. And so most of the time, if there's a basement on the property, is in the basement. And if it's a finished basement and kids are going to be spending time down there, or there's a rec room down there that the family's going to be spending time in, it's again, our advice and counsel is, if it's a high radon reading, you might want to consider, buyer, putting in a mitigation system. because there are health risks to radon. All of that's in our contract. So again, one of the things that you should be talking about when you're talking to people about our contract. It's a Kansas requirement that we have that in our contract. So Kansas takes it pretty seriously.
Can I ask a question? So if it's a ranch on a slab, would you still do radon? Would you recommend radon?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. And a ranch on a slab is no more expensive than any other property putting if a radon mitigation fan is put in. Placing it kind of becomes, it might become kind of problematic. Usually they'll find a place in the mechanicals room or, wherever the furnace and AC units are, and that kind of thing. So it does become a little more problematic on a ranch on a crawl space. If they find, because they'll still measure what's coming in the house, they'll put the monitor in the house, but if there's a high radon reading and it has been decided that a mitigation system is going to be put in, they now have to encapsulate the crawl space. And so that, in most houses, it's in the $800 to $900 range to put a mitigation fan in. In that situation where they're having to encapsulate the crawl space, it can get closer to $1,200 to $1,500, depending on how large that crawl space is. Because what they're trying to do is minimize the radon before it gets to where it can be drawn in by the fan. So, but absolutely, I think every house should be tested. That's just, okay.
Thanks.
Good questions. You all are coming up with great questions and things this morning. I love it. Number 6, pool and spa inspection. Obviously, that would only be necessary if there is a pool or spa on the property. And there are a couple of really good, again, that's your whole house inspector is not going to do that. That's a separate paid for inspection. And there are a couple of really good contractors out there that can do what they can do. It's harder to test a pool during the winter months. But they can still come out and take a look at the equipment and that kind of thing and give good information about it. So always good if that kind of equipment is on the property. Soils, geological, structural inspection. Now, even though they call that structural, it's not the same thing as when we're looking at foundation structures. Structural inspection on soil is how much weight can that soil bear. And so it becomes important if we're looking at building a property, we're looking at vacant land and we're going to build on it, or if we know that there are plans to add on to a property. These are things that can be done either at contract time or later on. And I would always, make sure as you're keeping in contact with people and they say, yeah, we're thinking about building on, another family room or another bedroom and bathroom on the back of our property. Oh, well, that it's probably a good idea if you could have a soil test done on that. So we run across that one a lot less frequently than we do some of these other ones. Sewer septic inspection, I think this should be moved up on this list on this particular form. Sewer and septic inspection, and again, whether the property's hooked into a public sewer system or is on a private septic system. 2 different kinds of tests on their inspections on these, but they both are necessary for whichever particular property. It started out years ago that we recommended sewer line inspections for the older properties in Old Prairie Village, in Old Overland Park and Old Kansas City, because those are clay pipes and are prone to break down. They can be damaged and infiltrated by trees growing, by tree roots and other landscape items. But I don't think that this inspection should be limited to those properties. Even in brand new construction, when we're using PVC pipe, which is less prone to those kinds of problems, there are still seams where 2 pieces are put together. And our soil here in Kansas City is a clay-based soil and it expands and contracts with the weather, dry weather and then wet weather. Makes those pipes move as well. And so those connections can come undone. They can also be damaged, by certain things too. So I think just about every property should have a sewer line inspection done. And because it's not only then those external forces, sometimes there are just problems. There can be blockages that maybe aren't affecting the property right now, but would, in another month. Or one person living in the property doesn't have a problem, but you can now have a family of 6 moving into that property, we're probably going to have a problem. So I think, this, it's not required. None of these are required, strongly recommended, and it's real easy for us to spend our buyers' money. Bear that in mind too, right? Because a sewer line inspection is a couple of $100. A septic inspection on a private septic system is a whole different thing. They can also do the camera thing. That's part of it. They will also take the cover off of a tank. If it's a septic tank system, they'll try to remove the cover or at least have access to it. And you can do a camera scope on those as well, see if those are cracked or if the baffles are still working and all that kind of stuff. But there's also a soil test, a percolation test that's can also be done on a private septic system. And Johnson County, Kansas requires that percolation test to be done every time a property is transferred that has a septic system on it that's located in Johnson County. I don't know if in Johnson County, Kansas. I don't know of any other county at this point in time in the metro area that requires that at this point. But again, very good thing for protection of your buyer. What that shows is, well, it shows 2 things. It shows, number one, that the lateral lines are working, and you can't scope lateral lines. Lateral lines are what takes the efflues from either the tank or the pond, the lagoon, whichever kind of system is being used, and then spreads that out into the soil to make sure that those are working properly. Also, it also shows us where the water table is, because even though the water table may have been 20 feet below surface area when the property was built and the septic system was first put in, water table might have changed. And so now that's within 10 feet or 8 feet, I'll say 8 feet of the surface area of the property. And so now that septic system is in violation of the health rules of the county. And that's why Johnson County requires it. So there's that. Water well inspection, you'll only run across this for the most part in very rural properties where they're not on public water. Although I will give you the warning that make sure that that's another reason for you to check the tax records and the county records thoroughly on every property. You might be surprised about some of the metro areas that are on septic systems and not on sewer lines. So make sure that you are aware of that. It's far less common for in the metro area for someone to be on a private well. That really truly is something that you find more outside of the metro area. But again, always make sure. You can always check that by what they're being charged for on their taxes, right? If there's a water, if they get a water bill, or water is included, because sometimes water is included in some of our cities around here, included in the city taxes, and certainly on sewer, they would be being charged sewer tax. Permits and zoning. Now, this isn't an inspection per se, but this is one of those things that I think is incumbent upon us to help the buyer do. Again, what we find out is not good enough. We can go check on the zoning if we know that our buyer wants to use this as a business. We can go check on whether that's allowed in that city and or county, wherever the property is located and whatever jurisdiction it's under. But we also then tell them to go check out that same information. You can say, hey, this is who I talked to at City Hall, and this is what they told me. But buyer, you really should check into this yourself, because what we say is hearsay, right? Right. So again, I think that's something that we should be doing, and all of that, all of this should be done within our inspection period. So that's why, yes, on our contract, the 10 days is what is the default in our inspection period. But if you know that we're going to need to get a septic system inspection done, and you don't know, I mean, because those people stay pretty busy, you know, the same people that inspect them are the same people that are installing them. So they get pretty busy, so that you may not be able to get that done within 7 days. So make sure that on each individual situation, oh, let me say one other thing about the sewer and septic inspection, the septic inspection specifically. There is a separate document for that. If the property is on a septic system, there's a separate a separate document that the seller should provide. It should be in the document section in MLS. That will, number one, set out, and this has changed over the last few years, and I really don't quite get this, but set out who's going to pay for the uncovering of the tank, if it is a tank, and who's going to pay for the pumping of the system, because that inspector is going to want that system pumped out. That's the only way they can see the walls of the tank system. So who's going to be paying for those two things? And also, there's a disclaimer on there now that your lender may require, the buyer's lender may require a septic inspection, and will certainly want to see the results of that. There have been a lot of instances where the buyer's lender would not lend on a property based upon what the septic inspection report said. So that's a very important document if the property is on one. All right, so there's that. Water rights rural district meter rights and transfer issues. So again, not so much in the metro area, but out in the more rural areas and the more rural water districts, there is a rent situation for the water meter. So those are rented to the property owner. That's not anything that we run across here in the metro area. And then to kind of tie all of this in, if you're working out in one of those areas, make sure you are aware that which is why, you know, it's probably not a good idea for us to be selling properties in Warrensburg, right? Because we don't know these things about Warrensburg, but you should know them about the 11 county metro area counties here that we do work with. And so whether that lease agreement, it needs to be transferred as of, and effective as of closing date and all that kind of thing. Water rights are what we talk about when there's maybe a shared pond, or where on the property's on a lake, privately owned lake, those kinds of things. So make sure that you're fully aware of those kinds of things, checking into it, all of this, what I started to say about the permits and zoning, and these kinds of things all within that inspection period. This is our due diligence period. We are also checking, I hope you all know, we are also checking on the insurability of that property as well. Make sure that your buyer is talking with their preferred insurance agent, letting them know that, hey, I'm under contract on this property address. And so, because if we can't get insurance on it, chances are that, or it's going to be very expensive, that we may not be able to get the loan on that, right? That might affect the buyer's ability to get the loan. So all of that should be done in the due diligence period. Just had another fleeting thought, and now I can't remember what it was. So all of these things, all of these things, permits and zoning, water rights, all of those things, you should be checking in just as you do, I hope you all do, are checking on the flood map, right? I check the flood map before I ever show the property, but it doesn't really matter. Once again, it doesn't matter what we think about that flood map. It's what the lender thinks or what FEMA thinks, right? If there's a lender involved and that property is affected by a floodway or a flood zone or a floodplain, the lender may not lend on it, number one, or may require flood insurance. Flood insurance can be very, 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 very expensive, prohibitively expensive for some buyers, will affect that buyer's ability to get a loan. So all of those things should be checked into. Those are not necessarily inspections. These are things that we should be looking into.
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
On insurance. So let's just say during the due diligence period, the buyers are not able to nail down insurance yet. Should we then extend the inspection period if the sellers are willing to?
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea, actually, Mary Ann. I also think that that's somewhat dependent upon why they haven't been able to get insurance. If it is a situation like that, then absolutely. If it's something about, hey, that there, a tiny corner of the property is in floodplain, and so we're still trying to find an agent that will cover that, trying to get bids on that. Absolutely. And the seller and listing agent should be very understanding about that. And
Or
maybe
like
even
roof, like let's say their roof is the culprit.
oh, then yes, absolutely. Yes, I would say that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be 2 layers of roofing, or there might be 3 layers of roofing on it. Or there might be, we're not running across this so much anymore, but there might be composition roofing on top of wood shingle. Right, some insurance companies won't touch those things. So yes, absolutely. In a situation like that where it is something about the property, I absolutely would ask for an extension of the inspection period. And it should be seriously considered by the seller and the listing agent. Good question. Yep. And then our buyer acknowledgement at the bottom of this. Buyers acknowledge that all inspections are to be done at their own expense, except as a contract may provide otherwise. So we may ask the seller to do some of these inspections for us. And all inspections are to be performed in the timeframes and deadlines agreed to in any sales contract. So our inspection period, whatever you negotiate there. If buyers elect to purchase the property without professional inspections, buyers are acting against the advice and recommendation of the broker and agent. All right, so that is what you need to have the conversation about. If your buyer is, and let me finish this paragraph. Buyers understand that they are responsible for verifying the required licensing and or certification requirements of all professionals that may be provided to them by broker or agent. Our whole house inspectors aren't licensed now, or they can be certified by being members of certain organizations. And so, but there's no licensing required. If you're going to have a roof inspection done, I would think that should be done by a licensed roofer. If you're going to have an HVAC, a special HVAC person come out, I would think that should be a licensed HVAC person or a licensed plumber looking at that system. Same thing about an electrical system, but our whole house inspectors are not licensed, just to kind of clarify that. So, but that's a conversation. And to kind of tie this back to how I started this whole thing, we are still seeing a lot of the in its present condition documents being included in our contracts. Box number 1 says that the buyer can it has the ability to do their inspections, and they can cancel the contract if they find any unacceptable condition. An unacceptable condition, we field these questions a lot too from our buyers. Well, what does that mean? That's anything that is unacceptable to you, right? It's harder to it's harder to claim that when it's something that we knew when we were looking at the property with our not professional inspector eyes. It's a little harder to claim those, but something that the inspector found that we could not have known without having that inspector out there, anything is in an unacceptable condition. So just to kind of field that question, I get that question a lot from agents too, and that's perfectly okay. But it is anything that the buyer finds unacceptable. So the buyer in box number 1, and let me go ahead then and pull up the in its present condition so we can talk about that as we're talking about this, and that's in the residential forms. All of our forms here in KCRAR are in alphabetical order. So you have to know the name of them. So it's, I know because we talk about this as the, as is addendum, but it's the in its present condition addendum. So box number 1, buyers entitled to conduct inspections. That doesn't change their ability to do that, but sentence number 2 on line 11, seller will make no repairs and or treatments. This doesn't mean that it's not just that we can't ask them to do it. It does mean that, but not just that. Our contract says that if evidence of wood destroying insects are found of a live infestation, or evidence of a past infestation and we can't find evidence of a prior treatment, our contract says that the seller is going to pay for that treatment. This document takes that out of the contract. Now we are agreeing that the seller is not obligated to do that, nor can we come back and ask them to make any repairs. On line 12, buyer will have the right to cancel the contract during the inspection period if the results of the inspections are unsatisfactory. Again, any unacceptable condition. And line 14, buyer waives any right to renegotiate. There is no inspection renegotiation period pursuant to the inspection provisions of the contract. All of that being said, this question comes up a lot too by buyers and by agents to us. Well, so what if they do want to? What if they do find something, but they still want to buy the house if we can get this resolved? All right, first we start with a conversation with the listing agent and say, you know, our buyer found this, they would still like to continue on. Will the seller consider, and then here's what we do. We can't remove this document from our contract. It's part of our contract. But what we could, if both parties agree, if the sellers agree, we can, in an amendment, say that buyers and sellers agree that to renegotiate, right? That sentence overrides this whole paragraph. The buyers and sellers agree to renegotiate because of unacceptable conditions found in buyers' inspection reports. Right, but we do have to acknowledge that, okay, we said one thing, but now we're saying something else. Because basically that's what this form does. Our contract says one thing, but now we want to say something else. So, all right, so that's paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 2, buyer is entitled to conduct inspections for informational purposes only. Seller will make no repairs or treatments. Buyer waives any right to cancel the contract pursuant to the inspection provisions in the contract. I still get shivers up my spine, you know, just even reading this. I know. There are times, but I would certainly try to do everything I could to talk an agent out, or I'm sorry, a buyer out of checking this box. One of the exceptions to that, though, would be if you're working with a contractor. If you're working with an investor who knows what they're looking for, if you know, and again, it's not our opinion, but if I feel pretty confident that they know what they're doing, then I kind of back off on that. I'm still going to say, I still think you should get inspections done, at least the whole house, or a structural, you know, or maybe one of those specific you know, but I might back off that a little bit if I feel comfortable. But, you know, again, it's not me. But I also make sure that they have signed that inspection waiver, that inspection advisory addendum back there. So just because, you know, I never, ever have worked with the buyer and not said, I think you should have inspections done. And if you don't have inspections done, you're taking a risk. Because folks, of course, it's happened to me before when buyers, oh, no, we're fine. Or there's a previous inspection report, you know, and the listing agent has given us, oh, well, no, we read that. We're fine with all of that. And I, you know, because we can't force anybody to do anything. The few times that it's happened that buyers did do that against my better judgment, it has never turned out well. I guarantee you that it will not turn out well. So, but we're seeing an awful lot of it. We're also seeing an awful lot of lawsuits these days. You know, people are bringing lawsuits against us because of things that happened. You know, when things weren't found that or weren't known that would have been found on a whole house inspection. So, you know, just protect yourself, protect your brokerage, and you know, protect your buyer is really what it boils down to too. Then paragraph number 3, which, you know, it's here. I try to ignore it, but it's here. Buyer waives any right to conduct inspections as outlined in the inspection paragraph of the contract. Seller will make no repairs or treatments. Buyer waives any right to cancel or renegotiate pursuant to the inspection provisions of the contract. So, you know, once again, if it's someone that I feel pretty, you know, confident that I feel okay with, that they know houses, you know, then I suppose I might let them check this box. So all kind of boils down to that. So that's the in its present condition, now that everybody knows how Linda feels about that form. All right, so back to our, so we talked about, generally speaking, the forms that are in our KW and KC folder. I really was planning on spending some time here this morning talking about the two that we see, that we should see on, but one that we should see on almost all transactions, and one that we see on quite a few of our transactions. And I'm not going to be able to deep dive into them as much as I was hoping to, so I'll try to kind of finish that up on Wednesday as well, but I will talk about both of them. The first one that I hope we see on almost every transaction is the seller's disclosure. And so it is in,
Linda,
uh-huh,
so for box 3, I mean, I know they can't get inspections during the whole like closing process and everything, but can you get inspections like after you've moved into the house and everything and they just are curious? They're obviously not going to ask for anything and can't ask for anything, but
oh, of
can they?
course.
Okay, because it says like they waive the right, so I just didn't know what that meant, like how literal that was.
Oh, right, as it pertains to the contract. Very good question, Kelly. Oh, of course, yeah, once they own the house, they can do whatever they want.
Okay.
Yeah, based on the terms of the contract. They will not be given access to the property for inspections during the term, during the pending, the
Okay.
executory part. So, oh, good. No, that's a great question. Of course, yes. And I also want to clarify on the home warranty thing too, because I think maybe this came up at Wednesday Night Warriors last week, and I'm not sure that I clarified it. When we're talking about a home warranty, the buyer waives the right to get a home warranty. Once again, that's during the terms of the contract. That and really that's an indication at time of presentation of the contract that the buyer's not interested at that time. After inspections, the buyer may decide they want a home warranty. They can certainly get one then and pay for it at closing. I mean, the window for the buyer to ask the seller, once we're through with inspections and through the inspection renegotiation period, if we haven't asked the seller to provide one, then we've closed that window. But the buyer can purchase one anytime through the term of the contract, the executory term of the contract, or after. So no, that's a great question, Kelly, because of the way that's worded. And I'm glad everyone's taking this wording so seriously. And just because the buyer waives it at contract time doesn't mean that they can't ask for it as part of the resolution of unacceptable conditions. Hey, we're not going to ask a seller, we're not going to ask you to do any repairs, or we might ask you to do repairs, but instead of, or in addition to, we want you to provide us a home warranty. So that all of that everything becomes renegotiable during that renegotiation period. And the buyer can do whatever they want to do once they own the house. So great, no, that's a very good question. So the seller's disclosure and condition of property addendum, about the only time that you're not going to see this is if it is a foreclosed property. Otherwise, I hope that we see some version of this. Even if it's an estate and the people have not ever, it's the kids of the previous owners and they've never lived in the property and they don't know anything. I would still prefer, they know something, right? They know who they've been paying the utility bills to, right? So there are some things on here that should be addressed in that situation. They absolutely can say, I never lived in the property. I don't know of any problems, so because that's all we're asking. That's the way every question on this form is worded. And so we jump down here to line 31, paragraph 5 of this, the very first disclosure question here. And when we're talking about the land, look on line 32. Are you aware of? Right? You may not be aware of anything on that property, but so no, I don't, right? So there's really no reason. Investors are another one, sometimes, well, I've never lived there, so I don't know. Well, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do, because you would have, if you weren't the one called when the furnace went out, your property management company was, and you would have seen a report at some point. So some things about the property. Rehabbers. Oh, no, I've never lived here. I don't know anything about it. But then they'll give you a 3-page disclosure of what they've done to the property. Well, if you actually did do all of these things and did them as you should have, then you know more about that property than any regular homeowner would have known. So, some of those are kind of going away a little bit. So about the only time you're not going to see one legitimately is if it's a foreclosed property. The bank really doesn't know anything about that property. So, even if you're working with Open Door or let's see, OfferPad or Home Partners of America, those that have owned properties, most of them have kind of evolved where they might not have this form available, but they'll have something. And it might only be a one-page document that talks about, the age of, the roof if they know, and, that kind of thing. So at least something. So most of the time, and so if there's not available in MLS when you're getting ready to show the property, I always try to send this to the buyer before we ever go look at the property. There may be something on here that indicates to them they don't even want to see it. So I always read it. I just try to send it to the buyer when it's available. If we're seeing a property on the first day that it's available, may not be readily available, might not be uploaded onto MLS yet. So, there are times, but at some point, and if it's not on MLS, be sure that you're asking the listing agent about it. They can always email it to you even before they upload it on MLS. They should have one available. So if it's not showing up on MLS, make sure that you're asking if there's one available. Okay, that's from the buyer's perspective, right? And so then we all look at this. I'm sure everyone here now, if you've looked at enough of these, you realize that for the most part, we're looking for yes checkboxes, right? Everything else, are you aware of? No, I'm not, right? So evidently there's no problem. If there's a yes checked on these types of questions, there should be some kind of explanation down at the box and the explanation box below that paragraph. Again, no one expects you to memorize this form. I would never expect you to memorize this form. I do expect you to read through it. And not just as a brand new agent. You need to be reading through it all the time so that you're familiar with the questions that are being asked. I hope that at some point you feel comfortable enough to say things like, well, paragraph number 5 is all about the land. We're not talking about the house yet. We're talking about the real estate, the definition of land that you all learned back in your pre-license class, the spot on the earth, right? Paragraph number 6 is all about the roof. Paragraph number 7 is, so if they ask a question, if the seller asks a question, you can say, well, that's a question that's addressed in paragraph number 7 of the seller's disclosure, right? So you should be, I hope that you become familiar enough that you know what each paragraph deals with. No one expects you to memorize the questions and in what order they're in, but does everybody here know that somewhere mixed into the seller's disclosure is a question about right of first refusal? Does everybody remember what right of first refusal means? So, right. So make sure that you're familiar with the questions that are being asked in here. And then just, as I said earlier, and I want to point it out here. So now, unfortunately, what the Forms Committee of MLS KCRAR does to us is that when they do add something, they're going to add it in the middle so that, when I feel comfortable that I know what the paragraphs are, they're going to add, a paragraph in the middle that shows, shifts everything. But, they've done that to me before. They did that when they did the electronic systems and then also about the previous inspection report. So I always have to relearn them. But paragraph number 17 is all about the utility. So even if, like I said, even if it's an estate and the kids of the previous owners, the deceased previous owners, and the kids have never lived there, they're still paying, I hope, still paying utilities. So they can at least fill paragraph number 17 out. So if it's me dealing with the seller, I don't let anybody get away with that, right? Oh, well, okay. You can say here that you're not aware of anything, but please fill out paragraph number 17. And then also page number 6, we're talking here about in paragraph number 19, all of the potentially personal property here. So, if there's a stove there and the refrigerator, please fill this out. So I will say that this is less of a problem than it used to be, but you are still going to run across those situations where the listing agent will say, well, there's no one available. They never lived in the property. If there is not one available, we have to address that on our contract. because our contract, not only is it in paragraph number 2 and already pre-printed as an addendum that is part of the contract, just not checking that box doesn't remove it from the contract. There are other places in our contract that refer to this form, to this document. So if our document does not exist, we have to write an additional terms and conditions in our contract that buyer and seller acknowledge that there is no completed and signed seller's disclosure available on this property. So it has to be there, or it has to be acknowledged that it's not there. So that's from from both sides of that, right? If we're working with the buyer, we want to make sure that one's available when we're writing the offer. If one is not available, we have to put in that disclaimer there that I just said. Working from a seller's point of view, and here's the thing about this too. If you're working with a seller that's willing to use .loop, then you can send this to them in .loop. I think it's really clunky for them to try to work with on .loop. So this is one of those things that, because I usually do a 2-step listing kind of presentation, I go over and look at the house first. I need to see the house before I know how to price the house, right? So when I make that appointment just for me to take a quick run through the property, obviously the seller's going to be there too, otherwise I don't have access. So I always tell them 10 or 15 minutes, but I always plan on an hour because they're going to be asking questions and pointing things out and all that kind of stuff. But this is one of the things that I take to them and hand to them and tell them, I find it easier for you to fill this out. I think you'll find it easier to fill this out by hand. Yes, you can do it I can send it to you in .loop, but if you're going to be doing this properly, a lot of these questions ask you when work was done and by whom and seller. So as you are answering these questions and you are getting those invoices out, that's the other thing. Go ahead and get those invoices out. Anything having to do with this property, you're not going to need anymore. So we're going to leave those for the new owners. I will make photocopies of them and leave the photocopies while the house is being shown, but we will keep this folder. So be pulling those invoices, and that allows you to put exact dates on here on the work that you had done and when you had those new appliances put in, all those kinds of things. So from both perspectives, this is a very important document that you will see on 99% of the transactions that you're involved in. Down to just the last few minutes here, I'm going to talk about the other one that is already pre-printed in our contract, the lead-based paint disclosure. You're not going to see this on every property because there is a time limit on this one. Any property built before, and if you all were here in class with me, I would ask you, but I'm sure you all know, right? Any property built before 1978, we have to have a lead-based paint disclosure addendum included. There are no exceptions to this. Even a foreclosed property has to have a lead-based paint disclosure. And once again, we are only asking the seller, what are you aware of, right? So get down to this. Our lead warning there. Oh, that's the other thing that I didn't talk about, because when we talked about our internal forms in the KW and KC folder, a couple of other things that I think should be in every buyer's folder. Number one, every buyer's folder should have the EPA lead-based paint brochure. Even if they tell you they're looking at they want to look at brand new construction. Remember, buyers are liars. They don't always know. So you will end up showing them a property that was built in 1961 because it's been fabulously updated and they love it. They don't need new construction, and they want this older house in the neighborhood where all the trees are and all the landscaping is already established. So if you forget then at that point to put in that pamphlet, that's a huge federal fine. The federal government doesn't get involved much in what we do in our everyday real estate world, residential real estate world, but this is one way in which the federal government does get involved, and it's a big fine if you haven't provided the pamphlet and or this disclosure hasn't been provided. So the lead warning there, the first paragraph, it's in bold, so it must be pretty important, is all about the dangers of lead-based paint. So then we get down to the disclosure part of it. From a listing standpoint, we have the seller make these disclosures. All sellers will initial on line 17. And then we talk about the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. Is the seller aware of lead-based paint in the property? And that's a yes or no. 99.9% of the time, it's going to be line 21 that is checked. I don't think our form allows us to check this, but I think they've changed that and a couple of times on me here. I think the seller has to be the one that checks that box, right? And when we're doing it through .loop, as they should, just as they are the ones that have to fill out the seller's disclosure. They are the ones that should fill this out. They initial, everyone initials on line 17, all sellers initial on line 17, and they will check the box most of the time on line 21 that they don't know whether there's lead-based paint in the house or not. Most sellers really don't know. The only ones that would know is if they've had a licensed contractor come do work in the property. That licensed contractor, if they were disturbing any walls, any painted surfaces, had to do a lead-based paint test and give the seller the results of those tests. Some sellers will remember that that was done and remember that they have those test results, but most sellers won't. And it's perfectly okay for the seller to say, I don't know whether there is or not. Still on the seller's side of it, all sellers will initial line 23, and this is dealing with records and reports available that the seller has. Right. And again, most of the time, the seller is going to be checking the box on line 28 that they don't have any reports or records pertaining to the presence of lead-based paint, either positive or negative, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes you will have that seller that has kept something that they had, they had new windows put in 7 years ago, and they remember that they had that test, that they have those test results. That's fabulous if they do, right? But most of the time it's going to be line 28, and that's perfectly okay. Again, from the listing point of view, then you are the licensee assisting the seller. You will be initialing line 42, saying that you have informed the seller of all of their obligations. If you initial that, which you have to, that also says that you've had that conversation with the seller, that they, if they know, they need to disclose. Because sellers always ask these questions. Well, I know it's got lead-based paint because I have this test result. Do I have to disclose that? Yes, you do, right? And especially since you asked me now, yes, you do, because now I know and I have to disclose it, even if you don't. There is nothing about lead-based paint in a property that's going to prevent a buyer from buying the property. Right now, FHA might require that to be painted, scraped and painted, and all of the paint scrapings removed. The buyer may say, well, it's got cracked and peeling lead-based paint. I want the seller to scrape and paint that. And all of that's okay. But because what I tell my buyers is that if the house was built before 1978, let's just assume there is lead-based paint in there, and we will take all necessary precautions whenever you're painting, or doing any work to the property. So there's nothing about that that's going to prevent a buyer from buying it unless it's an FHA requirement and unless the buyer wants it painted and the seller won't. All right, now we're going to talk about the buyer side of it. We're almost out of time here, but we'll get through this. All right, buyer's acknowledgement of all of this. Line 32. This is a very confusing line, but if you read the form, it makes sense. On line 32, over in bold, where it's pre-printed over there, buyer has received copies of all information listed above. The information they're talking about is information that the seller's providing, any test results or reports. So our buyer only initials here if they have received any reports or test results from the seller. They acknowledge receiving those. That's the only time that's signed. So most of the time your buyer's not going to be signing that line. On line 34, though, you are asking the seller to acknowledge receiving that pamphlet that you gave them. So make sure you have given them the pamphlet, and you will assign their initials here. So all buyers will initial there. All buyers will initial on line 36, and one of the two boxes will be checked. That they have received a 10-day opportunity or mutually agreed upon timeframe to conduct a risk assessment or inspection to determine whether there's lead-based paint or not, Or on line 39, they have waived the opportunity to have that inspection. Linda's very strong opinion on this, and Lynn agrees with me on this, is that we check the box on line 37 if the buyer has an inspection period that they're taking advantage of in the contract. Because they certainly can do lead-based paint testing if they choose to. I've been selling real estate for almost 40 years. I have never once had a buyer do a lead-based paint test, but they've received the opportunity to. I think that the only time that we check the box on line 39 is if they have checked box 3 on in its present condition form. That they have waived the inspection period on everything. Otherwise, they have received it. I don't want to be asked by a federal agent, well, why did they waive their opportunity to do this? Right? Because, and the only answer that I ever want to give is because they waived their opportunity for any inspections against my better judgment, federal agent. So, all right. So then on line 54, you will be signing the appropriate side because you are the licensee, either assisting the seller, the listing, your listing, or you're the licensee assisting the buyer if you're working with the buyer. So you will be signing on, I'm sorry, Ed, I said 54, I was looking at the wrong one. You sign down at the bottom underneath everyone else's signatures on line 62 on the appropriate side. All sellers sign this form, and it's presented to us and available to us on MLS. It should be right along with the seller's disclosure if the property was built before 1978, should be there. If it's not, ask the listing agent. Make sure that if it's not available when your buyer wants to go ahead and write an offer on this property, that you say that a completed and signed lead-based paint disclosure will be provided to the buyer within 24 hours of the effective date of the contract. I would say the same thing about a seller's disclosure that's not available, you know, if it's a privately owned property. So all sellers sign, it's available to us in MLS, all buyers sign, initial and sign when we're writing the offer. All right, ladies and gentlemen. It's 11 o'clock, we're done. Any questions? Let me get back to full screen here. See, I don't have any additional chats here. Okay, any questions about anything that we dealt with here today?
Super quick question on seller's disclosure. If they write on there, if the seller writes, you know, never lived here, all that, do we still, does the buyer sign that, or do we need a separate?
That technically is a disclosure. So yeah,
Okay.
the buyer was, yes, our buyer still would still initial that.
Okay.
If it's initialed and signed by the seller, yes.
Okay, thanks.
I know that's very frustrating. So, okay, so yeah, the great questions. All of you asked great questions this morning. I so much appreciate that. Wednesday, if you're available to join us on Wednesday, we will be talking specifically about the listing agreement and the buyer agency agreement as we have those documents. In today's world, things will be changing later on this summer, and we'll also kind of hit on some of those changes that we might expect to see. So, all right.
Thank you.
All right. I'll see you all Wednesday or at some other time. All right. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.